Hello, and welcome to Speak Honest. I am your host and certified relationship coach, Jennifer Noble. It has been my passion for over a decade to help women like you heal what's been holding you back from having the relationships you deserve. Are you struggling with a relationship where you can't seem to voice your emotions, needs, and boundaries without having it blow up in your face? Then you have found the right podcast, my friend. Get ready for practical tips, empowering truths, and honest conversations. Now, let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Speak Honest. I am Jen Noble, your go-to relationship coach. And on today's episode, we are going to be talking about setting healthy boundaries with family. Right? Listen, I don't know about you, but when I think about setting a boundary with my family, my whole body starts to shrivel up. I just don't want to do it. And there's so many things that hold me back from setting boundaries. But what is that costing me? It's costing me my happiness. So I want to get into all of that with you today. But before we get started, I want to remind you that we have our 12-week intensive relationship reboot program starting on January 13th. I am so excited to get this program up and running and going in January. I think it is probably one of my favorite times to be in a program. I love January, and it's because it's a fresh start. It's that whole January vibe. You know what I mean? Like where you get to make that fresh start, where you are looking at bettering yourself. And what we can be doing together is bettering your communication and your relationships. Now would be the perfect time to reach out to me and get started. I want you to go to speak-honest.com/assessment and schedule in a 30-minute completely free assessment with me. This is where you get started on healthier communication in your relationships. Are you stuck in toxic relationship patterns where you're just stuck in the same fight every time with your husband? Or maybe you just keep breaking up with your boyfriend every 6 months or every year, and it just seems like nothing is sticking because the same situations, the same patterns, and the same toxicity just keeps happening. Listen, you are not alone. This is exactly what I do. I coach women like you, and I teach them how to break out of these toxic patterns. And I would love to talk with you. If the Relationship Reboot Program is something that you are looking for, great. We'll talk about how to get you set up with that. And if not, great. I will still help point you in the direction that is best for you. I'll get you some free resources. I'll get you set up with what you need, because this assessment is your time. This assessment is for you, and I really want to help you. So please go to speak-honest.com/assessment to sign up for your free 30-minute assessment before the program starts on January 13th. Now is the time to do it. I cannot wait to speak with you. Now, let's get on with the episode. I am so glad you're here for this one, because today we are going to be talking about a topic that can feel extra icky: setting boundaries with family. Let's face it, family is, family, and we love them, of course, and they're important to us, but sometimes they're also the hardest people to set boundaries with. I know for many of us, boundaries with family can feel uncomfortable or even impossible at times, but here's the truth. Setting healthy boundaries with the people closest to us can actually strengthen those relationship bonds, not weaken them. So we are going to dive into why boundaries are especially challenging with family, why they're so important, and how you can start setting them in a way that feels respectful and doable. All right, are you ready to dig in? Let's get started. I want to start with the first. Do you find it difficult to set boundaries with family? Now, if you're sitting there right now and you're nodding your head along, I promise you I am not looking at you through a window. It's just that I have been there. I know what it's like, because family dynamics can be so complicated. There's history, there's shared experiences, and sometimes there's a sense of responsibility to keep the peace. So why do you think it's especially challenging to set boundaries with family? Well, because they are the ones that developed in us these deep-seated fears in the first place. And that's why it's just so hard. But let's talk about this, okay? Why is it with families? Does it feel like a whole different ball game than when it's with our coworkers or our best friends or just with acquaintances? And it's because setting boundaries with anyone, sure, can be tough, but with family, there's an extra layer of complexity. So first, there's emotional attachment. These relationships have so much history, so many shared experiences and expectations that have been building over the years. So sometimes these have been going on for decades, and it's not easy to shift these dynamics in a couple of months or even a couple of years. But then we also have the fear of conflict. No one wants to be the person who stirs the pot at the family dinner, do they? We often avoid setting boundaries because we're worried about upsetting people or starting an argument, and the stakes feel so high, especially when it's with family. And then let's talk about guilt and obligation. This one can feel terrible. Family can come with a sense of duty, like we should always be available or we should always have to say yes. So when we even think about setting a boundary, that guilt creeps in. Does that sound familiar? Because here's the thing, without boundaries, we risk burning out or building up resentment. And that's actually what can hurt those relationships in the long run. Okay, so we've talked about why boundaries are hard, but now let's flip the script and talk about why they're so important, especially with our families. See, first, boundaries protect your emotional health. Without them, we end up sacrificing our well-being just to make others happy. And this leads to burnout, it leads to resentment, and it leads to so much unhappiness. Boundaries are a way of making sure you are taking care of you. So when we set boundaries, we're showing respect, not just for ourselves even, but for others. When we are clear about what's okay and what isn't, it helps everyone involved. Everyone understands each other better, and ultimately, boundaries lead to stronger relationships. When you're clear about your limits, your relationships can become healthier and more balanced in the process. Boundaries are not about pushing people away. They are about creating a space where everyone's needs are respected. So remember, setting boundaries with your family is actually a way to build healthier, more fulfilling connections and not cut them off. But that's why it's so important to do this. But I hear you all asking, Jen, this is great and all. I understand boundaries are important. People tell me this all the time, but how do we do it? Well, let's talk about how to actually set a boundary. First, I want you to get clear on what your boundaries are. I want you to figure out what you need. What's upsetting you? What is your body telling you? Do you need more time for yourself? Maybe you need a little less criticism from mom, or maybe you need to just be understood for your life choices and respected for your time. I want you to get clear on what boundaries you need that will help you feel more balanced moving forward. And then I want you to start small. Don't go jumping into the big jugular right from the beginning. We don't need to be doing that. It will actually make things harder and scarier in the long run. Instead, I want you to start with something small and manageable. Say no to a minor request that your coworker asked you. Maybe set a limit on how often you'll answer late night texts from your friends. These are all the ways that we set boundaries for ourselves. And then I want you to be direct but compassionate. When we are ready to set a boundary, I want you to use I statements that focus on how you feel. So for example, instead of saying something like, I don't want to host dinner anymore. This is getting ridiculous. You guys never listen to me. Instead, and I get it, things are heated, but instead maybe we could try something more like this, like, hey, I'm feeling very overwhelmed when I'm expected to host every holiday dinner, and I need some help with this. Could you help rotate with me? And see here how being clear without blaming can help us create these boundaries. And then we need to anticipate pushback. And this is so important because people often come to me and say, Jen, I did it. I did the thing. I set the boundary and it was so great. And then they got really pissed off at me. Well, that's the thing is, that's sometimes going to happen. I mean, why else do you think that we have to set a boundary? Family members might not like these things that you need, but it's okay. It's okay to accept some resistance. It's perfectly normal. What is it like for you when you get rejected or when you hear no? Does it make you upset? Does it get you sad? But this is why we want to stay firm and consistent and compassionate, because boundaries are about setting limits that work for you, not seeking everyone's approval. And then I want you to stay consistent. This is the key. Boundaries only work when you stick to them. If you give in the first time someone pushes back, that's not going to help. So if you say, I don't want to host Thanksgiving dinner, and your mom says, oh, come on, we need you to do it. And you say, oh, all right, Mom, that's kind of you giving in, isn't it? You need to stay consistent. You need to be firm, yet compassionate when you're sending the message. And it shows that your limits are real. Setting boundaries might feel uncomfortable at first, but with the more practice you give it, the more natural it becomes. Now, I want to tell you a story I had with a client, and she had a really, really rough boundary with her mom. See, her mom had a key to her house, and she would just come over unannounced all the time, sometimes even just letting herself in, even when her husband and her weren't even home. And it started to really affect their marriage between her and her husband. Her husband felt like they had zero privacy, and so they were having more and more fights. And so my client knew something had to change, so she came to me and she was asking, Jen, how do I do this? How do we get to a better place where my husband isn't upset with me all the time? So we worked together and we decided to start small. And we worked on some boundaries and some other things in other places. And then we eventually built up to sending a text to her mother. And it was after a time when her mom had just let herself in again. And so she sent her a text and she said, hey, Mom, I noticed you stopped by the other day and let yourself in. Can you please do me a favor and let me know next time before you come over? Bam. Nice, simple text. And generally speaking, you send something like this to someone and they say, yeah, okay, no problem. But it doesn't always work out that way, does it? So, of course, in this situation, it did not go as well as just saying, yeah, no problem, hun, that's what I'll do. And instead, even though the text was incredibly respectful and it felt great to my client, it didn't land very well with her mom. Her mom called her literally right away, like as soon as she got the text. And she got incredibly passive aggressive with her. But you know what? This happens. And we were prepared for this because we knew this was going to happen. People pout sometimes when we set boundaries, and we just need to let them pout. So when my client came back to me and told me everything that had happened, what we decided to start working on next were the beliefs underneath the fears of setting these boundaries. So when her mom came back and got passive aggressive and then my client felt bad, she felt like she was the problem. She felt like everything was her fault. Do you see where these beliefs are coming from? And these beliefs are holding her back from setting these boundaries and living her best life. So we worked on them for quite a while. And this was great because a couple months later, her mom texts and says, hey, I'm coming over to drop something off today. Hey, this is a good sign. She's texting first. That's actually a great thing. But before my client could even respond back, the mom had already let herself into the house. And she was like, okay, this is exactly what I don't want. I mean, what if her and her husband were, having some intimate time in the living room or something like that? This cannot keep happening. And so she had to say something. And I'm so incredibly proud of her. She went to the bathroom and she took a big deep breath and she did this method that I have called the raise method, which I talk about in my workshops. If you ever are interested in those, you can come to one of my workshops. And she grounded herself. She regulated herself. And she went back out there and she said, Mom, thank you so much for letting me know first. But next time, can you please wait to hear back from me before letting yourself in? And now we see how we are building on our boundaries. So the first boundary, it wasn't enough for her mom. So we're just going to keep being more consistent and more firm and more direct as we go on. But as you can imagine, yet again, this didn't go down very well with her mom, and her mom blew up. She got really upset and things got incredibly uncomfortable. And there's really just no sugarcoating this, that sometimes this just happens. But here's the part that gets me excited and makes me really, really proud of her. So right there in that moment, in the heat of the moment, when everything's going on, my client says to her mom that she wants her key back. Right then and there. I can't even believe we never even practiced doing this. And she just decided that was the boundary that she needed. She said, Mom, if you're not going to respect me for this decision, then I'm going to ask for the key back. Now, her and I had talked a couple of times about if she wanted to get the key back from her mom and all this stuff, but that was all based on what ifs. We hadn't gone there yet. So this was all on her gut feeling. And she felt so powerful and so great after this when she came back and told me all about it. And it was one of the hardest boundaries she had ever set. And it was not easy. And I want to be really honest here that her mom kept getting really upset and did not speak to her for, I think it was like 3 months or something like that. I mean, you can imagine that someone who's that close with their mother, that their mother has a key to their house. This was a really hard thing to have happen. So I worked with her for a while during those 3 months to build up her self-confidence, her self-worth, and to see that she was not the problem in this relationship, that her mom just needed some time to cool off. And it was the first time that she'd really set a boundary like this with her mom. So things were going to get a bit heated. We just have to let them go off. We have to let them cool off, and we just need to let them pout. And about 3 months later, the mom came back with some silly text asking for a recipe or something like that. I don't remember. But now the two of them have a great relationship. And it's so great getting to hear everything that they're doing together and getting to follow along with just how great that relationship is becoming. And the mom is starting to really respect her now in other ways too, because she saw that her daughter held to this boundary. You see how this works? So yeah, it might get worse before it gets better. But I promise you, it'll be totally worth it in the end. And so as we're wrapping up here, I just want to go over everything we talked about. So remember, boundaries protect your emotional health. They are essential for keeping you from feeling drained or resentful. Also, boundaries show respect both for yourself and for your loved ones. By setting limits, you're honoring your needs and giving others the chance to respect them as well. And lastly, and this is so important to remember, if there's one thing you remember from this entire podcast, I want you to remember this. Boundaries strengthen relationships. Okay, I'm going to say it again, just in case you dozed off, come back. Boundaries strengthen relationships. Now, it might be uncomfortable, and it might get a little bad before it gets better. And there might be a lot of pushback, and things might get really dicey. But in the long run, boundaries allow for healthier, more fulfilling connections. Thank you all so much for coming along on this ride with me today on this podcast and for talking about boundaries. If you're interested in learning more about how to set healthy boundaries, again, I want to invite you to book an attachment assessment with me. In that assessment, we could talk about the program, and we actually talk about boundaries in week 8 and 9 in the program. We go through 2 whole weeks of boundaries because it's that important. And we wait till the end of the program to get into them because there's so much work you have to do before you can even build up to it. So if after listening to this podcast, you're still sitting there thinking, this is just really hard for me, Jen, to set boundaries. I don't think I can do it. I keep trying. I just keep failing at it. Well, I just want you to know that you're not failing. You're trying, and that's what's important. But also, I get it, because setting boundaries is one of the hardest things that we can possibly do. It's why I put it at the end of the program, because we have to work on all of the other stuff before we can even get to a place where we're feeling comfortable to set them. So if this sounds like you, I want you to go to speak-honest.com/assessment. Book an assessment with me, and we'll talk about what it is that you need to get to a place to start building healthy, happy, fulfilling relationships through setting boundaries. I cannot wait to speak to you. All right, everyone, have a beautiful week and take care. As we wrap up today's conversation, always remember that healing is a journey, not a destination. And it is an honor to be a part of your healing journey. If you want to dig deeper into the topics we covered today, be sure to head over to our show notes where you can find all of the valuable information mentioned in today's episode right there. And please remember to rate, review, and subscribe if you enjoyed today's podcast. Your feedback means the world to us and helps others discover our podcast. Until next time, remember to speak up and speak honest.